The envelope landed on the kitchen counter the way Garrett always delivered bad news, without warning, without eye contact, and with the quiet confidence of a man who had already decided how the story would end. Maren Hale Orvat, 36 years old, director of the Orvat Family Trust and wife of Garrett Orvat for 11 years, looked at the envelope but did not pick it up. She was still holding a dish towel. She had been drying a glass when she heard the front door open, heard his shoes on the hardwood, heard him stop in the kitchen doorway. She had turned around expecting the ordinary, a briefcase, a tired expression, the usual silence that had grown between them over the past year, like mold behind drywall, slow and invisible until it wasn't. What she got instead was the envelope. Divorce papers, Garrett said. He was 42, CEO of Orvat Meridian Properties, a commercial real estate firm that managed over 200 properties across British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. He had built it, he always said. He used that word the way some men use cologne, too much, too often, so it became the first thing you noticed and the last thing you forgot. My lawyer's information is inside. I'd suggest you get your own. Maren set the dish towel on the counter. She looked at him. The jaw she had once found strong, the eyes she had once thought were honest. And she said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, because she had already said everything that mattered, months ago, in a conversation he had dismissed before she finished her second sentence. She picked up the envelope, set it beside the fruit bowl, and went back to drying the glass. Garrett blinked. That was not the reaction he had prepared for. Did you hear me? I heard you, Maren said. He left the kitchen. She heard him go upstairs, heard the guest room door close, the one he had been sleeping in since March. She stood at the sink and looked out the window at their backyard in North Vancouver. The cedar deck he had never finished building, the garden she tended every spring, the Douglas firs along the back fence that turned the afternoon light gold, and she breathed slowly, the way her grandmother had taught her to breathe when something wanted to knock her sideways. She was not knocked sideways. She had known this was coming. What Garrett did not know, what he had never once thought to find out, was that Maren had also known something else for a very long time, and that something else was the reason she was still standing at the sink, drying glasses, perfectly calm. Garrett Orvat had met Maren 11 years ago at a fundraiser for the Vancouver Children's Hospital. She had been there representing the Hale Foundation, a charitable trust her grandfather, Edmund Hale, had established in the 1970s. Garrett had been there with investors. He had assumed she was a coordinator, one of the young women in dark blazers circling the room with auction paddles and serene expressions. He found out later she was the trust's director. He told the story at dinner parties as though it were charming, the mix-up, the discovery, the romance, as though the mistake had been a small and insignificant one. It hadn't been. Maren had noticed that from the beginning. Garrett looked at her and saw someone who fit neatly into the life he was building, presentable, educated, quietly accomplished, and undemanding. He was not cruel about it. He simply never looked any deeper than what was useful. And for years, Maren had told herself that was enough. That partnerships were built on compatibility and shared direction, not on being fully known. She stopped telling herself that around the time she found the hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. Sutton Hotel, downtown Vancouver, a Tuesday in November. Garrett had told her he was in Calgary for a development meeting. She had not confronted him immediately. That was not how Maren operated. Instead, she had gone quiet in a way that looked to Garrett like acceptance, like a woman retreating. He had no idea she was advancing. The firm Garrett had built, Orvat Meridian Properties, was in fact established with seed capital that came almost entirely from the Hale Foundation's commercial development arm. Garrett had come to Edmund Hale's estate 3 years before the old man died, looking for investment partners. Edmund had liked Garrett the way he liked most ambitious young men, with one eye open. He had agreed to a partnership structure that gave Garrett operational control in exchange for a 49% equity share held in trust. The trust was administered by the Hale Foundation. The foundation was directed by Maren. Garrett knew this. What Garrett had forgotten, or perhaps decided didn't matter, was the secondary clause in the original partnership agreement, the one Edmund had insisted on, and his own lawyers had drafted with the quiet precision of people who had seen too many ambitious young men up close. The clause stated that in the event of dissolution of the marriage between any Hale family beneficiary and a controlling partner of Orvat Meridian Properties, the equity held in trust would convert to full ownership of the foundation within 60 days. Garrett had signed it in 2015. He had been so focused on the operational control provisions that he had treated the secondary clause like the fine print at the bottom of a phone plan. Something for later, something that probably wouldn't matter. Maren had read it the week after she found the hotel receipt. She had sat in her office at the Hale Foundation building on West Georgia Street, with the original agreement in her hands, and she had read it 4 times. Then she had called the foundation's legal counsel, not the firm Garrett used for his corporate work, a different firm entirely, one that had represented the Hale family for 30 years, and she had asked them a very specific question. The answer was yes. What happened over the following 4 months was invisible to Garrett because he was not looking. He was looking at Renata Voss, 31 years old, a real estate acquisitions consultant his firm had hired the previous spring. He was looking at her in the way he had stopped looking at Marin years ago, with attention, with interest, with the particular focus of a man who still needed to be reflected back to himself as impressive. Renata gave him that reflection. She laughed at the right moments. She asked the right questions. She had no idea, or perhaps chose not to think about, what she was stepping into. While Garrett was looking at Renata, Marin was meeting with the Hale Foundation's board of directors. She was reviewing the equity structure of Orbit Meridian Properties with 2 forensic accountants she had quietly retained. She was reading financial disclosures she had obtained through her trustee access. Disclosures that showed, among other things, several vendor payment streams she did not recognize, routed through a holding company she had never heard of called Voss Capital Consulting. She recognized the name Voss. The payments had begun 9 months ago. They were listed as strategic advisory fees. The total, across 3 quarters, was $430,000. Marin sat with that number for a long time. She did not feel what she expected to feel. Rage, humiliation, the hot collapse of betrayal. She felt something colder and more clarifying. She felt the particular stillness that comes when you understand exactly what is happening, and you also understand that you already have everything you need to respond to it. She asked the forensic accountants to document everything. The morning Garrett served her with divorce papers was a Thursday in September. By that point, Marin had already retained one of the most respected commercial litigation firms in British Columbia. She had already instructed them to file the notice of trust conversion, the legal mechanism triggered by the secondary clause, and they had done so quietly the previous Friday. Garrett did not know this yet. He found out on a Monday morning, 10 days after he had left the envelope on the kitchen counter, when his own legal counsel received a 17-page notice from the Hale Foundation's lawyers. Marin was not in the house when Garrett came home that afternoon. She had moved, the week prior, to a suite in the Fairmont Pacific Rim while the legal process unfolded. She had told him she was leaving in a 2-line text message. He had not responded, which was fine. She was not waiting for a response. She was sitting in the hotel restaurant, having lunch with her oldest friend Petra Vance, when her phone buzzed with a message from her lawyer. It said, simply, "He called. His counsel has confirmed receipt. They're asking for an emergency meeting." Marin showed Petra the message. Petra, who had known Marin since they were 12 years old and who had sat with her through the worst of the past year, read it twice and then set the phone down on the table. "How do you feel?" Petra asked. Marin thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about most things. "Like myself," she said, for the first time in a while. The emergency meeting happened 2 days later in a boardroom on the 41st floor of a tower in downtown Vancouver, with a view of the harbor and the North Shore Mountains beyond it. Garrett arrived with 2 lawyers. His expression, when he saw Marin sitting across the table with her own legal team, was the expression of a man recalibrating in real time, reassessing, reordering, trying to understand how the landscape had shifted when he wasn't watching. He looked at her the way he had not looked at her in years, with attention, with something close to wariness. The Foundation's lead counsel, a woman named Adaeze Okonkwo, who had practiced commercial law for over 2 decades and who had an almost academic calm in high-tension rooms, walked Garrett's team through the equity conversion clause. She did not rush. She cited page number. She referenced case law. She answered the objections his lawyers raised with the patience of someone who had already anticipated every objection and prepared for each of them. Garrett, to his credit, did not perform the outrage some men perform in rooms like that. The table slapping, the raised voice, the accusation designed to destabilize. He sat very still, which was, in Marin's experience, how he responded when he knew he had miscalculated. She had seen it twice before in their marriage. Once when a major development deal collapsed in 2019. Once when his mother confronted him about missing a family funeral. He went very still, like an animal who understands that the environment has changed. "What does she want?" Garrett finally said. He looked at his own lawyers, not at Marin. Adaeze glanced at Marin. Marin nodded slightly. "My client," Adaeze said, "is not seeking punitive damages. She is not looking to dismantle the firm or to terminate its operations. The employees of Orbit Meridian Properties, approximately 260 full-time staff across 3 provinces, are not a consideration she takes lightly. She is prepared to offer a transition agreement that protects operational continuity. Garrett's jaw tightened fractionally, and in exchange, full conversion of the trust equity to foundation ownership. Your operational role terminates within 90 days. The $430,000 in payments made to Voss Capital Consulting, which the Foundation's forensic team has documented in full, will be repaid to Orbit Meridian operating accounts. And you will sign a non-disparagement agreement. The room was very quiet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a seaplane crossed low over the harbor, small and bright against the grey water. One of Garrett's lawyers leaned close and said something quietly. Garrett listened, his eyes on the middle distance, and then he said just as quietly something back. Then he looked at Marin for the first time since they had sat down. Really looked at her, the way he had failed to look at her for the better part of a decade. "You've had this the whole time," he said. It was not quite a question. "My grandfather wrote it into the agreement," Marin said. "He believed in protecting what he built. I suppose I learned that from him." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Around the table, his lawyers waited. Her lawyers waited. The harbor outside went on being grey and wide and indifferent. "The staff," Garrett said. "You said you'd protect the staff." "I said it and I meant it," Marin said. He looked at the table. Something moved across his face that she couldn't fully name. It wasn't remorse exactly. Or maybe it was. Maybe it was the small, belated version of it that arrives only when the consequences are real. "All right," he said. The transition took 3 months. Marin did not move back into the North Vancouver house. She bought out Garrett's share of it in the settlement. It had been in her name originally, purchased with inheritance funds before they married, and she spent a week in October repainting the guest room, the one Garrett had slept in since March, a shade of blue-green that reminded her of the ocean at Tofino in winter. She put a reading chair in the corner. She filled the bookshelf with books she had been meaning to read for years. The Hale Foundation assumed majority control of Orbit Meridian Properties on the 1st of December. Marin appointed an interim CEO, a veteran property manager named Callum Shaw, who had been with the firm for 12 years and who knew its operations better than Garrett had in the last 3. The board was restructured. The vendor payment irregularities were quietly resolved. In January, Marin returned to her office on West Georgia Street for the first time since the autumn. Her assistant had left a coffee on her desk and opened the blinds. The morning light came in flat and pale, the way Vancouver light comes in winter, colorless and honest, without the softening effect of summer. She sat down. She opened her calendar. She had a board meeting at 10, a call with the Foundation's Education Grant Committee at noon. And in the afternoon she was meeting with a non-profit out of Edmonton that was looking for development support for affordable housing. It was an ordinary morning in the way that ordinary mornings become precious when you have spent a year standing at a window wondering how you got so far from yourself. Her phone rang. It was Petra. "How is it?" Petra asked. "Quiet," Marin said. She looked around the office, the framed photographs of the Foundation's grant recipients on the wall, her grandfather's original vision statement in a simple black frame near the door, the view of the street below. "Good quiet. Are you going to be okay?" Marin thought about the dish towel, the glass she had been drying, the envelope on the counter. She thought about Garrett's face in the boardroom, that stillness, that late and insufficient recognition. She thought about her grandmother's voice. "Breathe. The situation is not bigger than you are." "I was always going to be okay," Marin said. "I just needed to remember it." Outside on West Georgia, the city moved the way cities do, without regard for any individual's grief or relief or quiet triumph. Buses, cyclists, people in winter coats pulling collars up against the November cold. A woman walking a dog laughing at something on her phone. A delivery truck reversing slowly into a loading bay. Marin watched it for a moment, that ordinary movement of ordinary life, and then she turned back to her desk, opened the board meeting agenda, and began to read.